Dawn never really arrived on July 5, 1943. The horizon of Western Russia glowed crimson long before the sun appeared, and the glow came not from light but from fire. At 4 in the morning, the German artillery opened up across a 250-kilometer front. In seconds, the sky shattered. The ground shook like a living thing. The air became an ocean of thunder. Men yelled orders that vanished before reaching the next trench. Within minutes, the farmlands around Kursk, the calm curves of fields and villages, were scarred into molten dust. Smoke rolled low and heavy, turning dawn into night. By the time the first German tank engines roared to life, thousands were already corpses among the wheat. The largest armored confrontation in human history had begun. They said the noise could crush a person's heartbeat. Soviet telephone wires melted from overuse. Inside the steel cages of Tigers and Panthers, crews felt the armored floor plates vibrate under their boots. Each tank was a furnace filled with men who knew that one solid hit could turn their world into a flash of heat and silence. Along both sides of the front, the air smelled of oil and ozone. Commanders could barely distinguish friend from foe through the dust clouds that rolled like thunderheads. When one tank died, the turret blasted upward in a spray of sparks. Debris rained back down in small red meteors. There were no heroes here, only survivors counting seconds. After Stalingrad, Hitler had promised vengeance. He wanted one last massive blow to crush the Red Army before it could recover. Operation Citadel was born from that obsession. The idea was simple: trap the Soviet forces bulging around the city of Kursk by sending two great armored claws, one from the north and one from the south, to close the pocket. Destroy them, restore dominance, and prove that the Wehrmacht still had teeth. His generals hesitated. Intelligence suggested the Soviets expected the move. Hitler ignored them. He wanted a spectacle of destruction that would redeem Stalingrad with fire. But the Soviets already knew every detail. British codebreakers and partisan informants had been feeding data for months. Stalin's response was unlike anything in warfare before. Engineers transformed the landscape into an industrial labyrinth of death. 9 defensive belts, hundreds of kilometers deep, trenches, ditches, barbed wire, mines, and artillery in layers. Each position backed by another, then another. More than 500,000 mines waited under the soil, and 3,000 kilometers of wire formed a cage around Kursk. The Red Army chose not to dodge the attack. It prepared to swallow it whole. When the German columns finally rolled forward, the earth erupted beneath them. Mines lifted 40-ton panzers like tin cans. Wheels and tracks scattered through the air. The first wave disappeared into dust. The second met walls of shellfire, so dense it looked like gray rain. Exhaust smoke mixed with burning fuel, creating clouds that hid everything beyond 20 meters. Behind stalled tanks, engineers crawled forward under sniper fire to clear paths by hand, cutting fuses and dragging twisted metal out of the way. It was precision turned to desperation. Above them, the sky burned with another war entirely. Hundreds of German dive bombers and Soviet fighters tangled in dogfights that stretched from ground level to cloud line. Pilots saw explosions below and lost all sense of scale. Tiny flashes were actually tanks, each carrying 5 men whose lives ended in that instant. One German ace later said it felt like flying over an iron volcano. When planes fell, they crashed into convoys already burning, fueling new infernos. The noise never ceased. It was continuous thunder that erased the human voice. Inside Soviet bunkers dug deep into clay, crews of anti-tank guns listened instead of seeing. Visibility was almost zero. They waited for the sound of engines, for the metallic growl that signaled armor approaching. The moment they fired, counterfire arrived. Only minutes separated life from obliteration. The heat burned skin even underground. Commanders moved between gun positions, muttering orders that were half mechanical, half prayer. Hold, reload, fire short, adjust 2 degrees left. Language had broken down into fragments of command. Behind these men stretched the rest of Russia: families, villages, factories. There was nowhere to fall back. Prokhorovka, a small valley of open farmland, became the center of hell. By July 12th, the German and Soviet spearheads slammed directly into each other there, unleashing the biggest concentrated tank fight the planet has ever seen. Nearly 1,000 tanks fought in an area of barely 10 square kilometers, so cramped that tanks rammed each other because there was no room to maneuver. Dust roared to the sky like smoke from erupting volcanoes. In that brown twilight, no one knew which direction the enemy came from. German Tiger crews fired at flickers in the murk. Soviet T-34s stormed forward at full speed, shells exploding around them. When their guns jammed, they rammed enemies point blank, tracks grinding like saws. Witnesses said the valley disappeared under flame. Metal boiled red, ammunition cooked off. Turrets flew skyward, trailing ribbons of fire. The wheat burned to ash, mixing with oil to form black mud that swallowed boots. Tanks lay atop tanks, piles of armor fused together, engines howling long after their crews were gone. Midday sunlight vanished beneath clouds of smoke. By night, the battlefield was alive with small explosions, magazines detonating sporadically, fuel lines rupturing, ammunition feeding the inferno. Those who survived the clash stumbled deaf and half-blind, their uniforms colorless beneath soot and dust. Numbers meant nothing anymore. Commanders on both sides lost contact with entire divisions. Soviet and German corps counted casualties in approximate percentages. Later, historians estimated between 500,000 and 1 million total killed, wounded, or missing. Census sheets became meaningless. Entire units simply stopped existing. Identification tags melted into slag. Trucks ferrying survivors east covered their windows so replacement troops wouldn't see the wasteland they were heading toward. The myth of the invincible German blitzkrieg died right there. For every Tiger that broke through the first Soviet line, another sea of anti-tank guns waited behind it. The invaders' speed advantage meant nothing in a minefield measured in miles. When Hitler realized the offensive had stalled and that Allied forces were landing in Sicily, he ordered a halt. Operation Citadel collapsed. The German army, bled and fatigued, began to withdraw. Its ability to mount another major offensive on the Eastern Front evaporated forever. The Iron Cross still glittered on some uniforms, but it had lost all meaning. When the guns finally fell silent, the landscape resembled another planet. Burned machines created mountains of twisted metal. Cratered fields stretched so far that horizon melted into haze. Soviet engineers moved across the terrain, examining what could be salvaged. Sometimes they found crews still inside wrecks, their hands fused to controls by heat. Tanks were marked with chalk, recycle, melt, or grave. Crows nested in open hatches. The smell was not just smoke or oil, but something chemical, bitter, unidentifiable. Even months later, rain released the stench again from the soil. Locals returning after the fighting found nothing familiar, just skeletons of houses, stripped trees, and mountains of iron. Farmers fixed plows behind surviving tractors and turned the soil, only to strike buried shells instead of rocks. Each thunderstorm unearthed more remains. For decades, children collecting scrap would still find helmets, bones, and rusted shells. Kursk had consumed everything metal, men, and mercy. A German survivor later wrote, "There was no enemy, only the machine of death that we all built, and that machine ate everyone." He wasn't being poetic. He was describing the end of logic. Battle had become industry, and men were its disposable parts. By the end of July, the Red Army stood amid the wreckage, victorious but disbelieving. They had not just defended an area of land, they had traded blood for momentum. From this battlefield onward, the push would be theirs. The Kursk salient had turned from a bulge into a springboard. The Soviet guns would now point west, toward every occupied city, every retreating column, every step of vengeance yet to come. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Community stretches across the entire world. You are not just a viewer, you are part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you are here. Thank you for. By the second week of July 1943, both armies were locked in one of the largest and most intense confrontations the modern world would ever see. The German advance had crawled forward for a week through belts of mines and barbed wire. A grinding ordeal that drained men and machines faster than anyone imagined. Yet their commanders insisted there was still one chance to break the Soviet line: strike at Prokhorovka. A shallow valley of open fields and scattered villages south of Kursk. They called it the Key. In reality, it became hell itself. On the morning of July 12th, the earth began to shake even before the first shells hit. The 5th Guards Tank Army under General Pavel Rotmistrov launched his counterattack just as the German 2nd SS Panzer Corps moved forward to smash the 3rd Soviet defensive belt. Within minutes, nearly 1,000 tanks and self-propelled guns were converging inside an area barely 10 square kilometers wide. Every meter of the valley erupted in fire and dust. The German Tigers and Panthers, larger and better armed, weighted hull down on ridges. Their 88mm guns capable of destroying a T-34 from 2 kilometers away. The Soviet T-34s, hundreds of them, came hurtling forward at full speed across the plain. Low silhouettes emerging through haze like waves of metal. When the first salvo struck, the shock wave flattened the wheat. The soil turned black with oil and smoke. Tank crews lost all sense of direction. The combined thunder of engines and explosions erased sound itself. Men felt vibrations through the soles of their boots rather than hearing anything. Dust rose so thick that day turned to twilight. A German radio operator later reported that he could no longer tell friend from enemy. Every shape was a monster. We fired at movement, nothing else. Inside the Soviet assault columns, visibility dropped to 0. Drivers followed the glow of tank exhausts ahead like blind men chasing sparks. When their guns jammed or ammunition ran out, they rammed the first silhouette they saw. The clang of steel against steel echoed like giant hammers striking anvils. Some tanks locked together and rolled, crushing anyone between them. Rotmistrov's force numbered 593 tanks and assault guns. Charging directly into the path of the 2 SS Panzer Corps, which fielded 494 armored vehicles, including 42 Tigers. The math was brutal precision. Clash replaced maneuver. German gunners fired disciplined volleys, each 88mm shell punching through 2. Sometimes 3 thin-skinned T-34s in a straight line. Yet for every Tiger standing firm, 5 Soviet machines swarmed around it, flanking, ramming, enveloping. From the air, observers saw swirling knots of vehicles grinding in circles, each framed by flame. Rotmistrov later remembered the dust rose in thick clouds, tanks advancing in an unending flow. It was intolerably hot. The air reeked of burning oil. Crews fought in suffocating heat. Many passed out from fumes before shells ever reached them. The Luftwaffe descended next. German dive bombers screamed down from altitude and, within minutes, destroyed nearly 80 Soviet tanks in a single raid, the first recorded instance where air power alone annihilated armor on that scale. Fragments rained across the valley. Mutilated machines burned wherever the bombs landed. Still, the fighting continued hour after hour. Waves of Soviet armor trying to push the German wedge back across the Sel River. The plain trembled endlessly. Tracks tore open the ground until dust and smoke merged into one colorless storm. When explosions stopped for a moment, men heard only the hiss of fire and the rumble of overheated engines that still ran long after crews were dead. By late afternoon, hundreds of vehicles lay crippled or aflame. Calculations later showed German losses for that single day between 252 and 323 tanks. While Soviet records counted over 1,600 destroyed during the larger Operation Citadel. But raw numbers didn't show the decisive factor. The Germans could not replace those machines. Each Tiger lost represented months of industrial effort and a veteran crew that could never be retrained. The Soviets, bleeding terribly, still had replacements rolling daily from factories across the Urals. As evening fell, Prokhorovka became a single vast furnace. The midday sun had vanished behind a ceiling of black smoke mixed with dust. The ground refused to cool. When men tried to lie flat for cover, they burned their faces against it. The few who survived described the valley as a cauldron made of iron. When the guns finally subsided that night, no clear front line remained, just a vast field of burning wreckage stretching beyond the horizon. Both sides claimed success. In truth, neither advanced further. The Germans held fragments of ground, but had lost the power to attack again. Their spearhead had shattered. The next morning, Hitler's maps showed no progress, only mounting reports of casualties. Then came new urgency. The Allies had landed in Sicily. Germany needed troops there more than on the Eastern Front. On July 13th, Hitler called off Operation Citadel, marking the end of Germany's last big push in the East. Withdrawal began almost immediately under constant Soviet artillery fire. What began as an ambitious strike to destroy the Red Army turned into a fighting retreat. Soviet High Command seized the opportunity, launching Operation Kutuzov in the north, targeting the German salient around Orel. While in the south, Operation Rumyantsov forced back the enemy toward Belgrade and Kharkov. The mighty Kursk bulge, once the symbol of German attack, became a springboard for Soviet victory. Within 6 weeks, Orel was surrounded and abandoned. Belgorod fell shortly after. On August 23rd, Kharkov was liberated once again. What had taken Germany 2 years to conquer, the Red Army reclaimed in 40 days. Casualty figures are staggering even by the standards of the Eastern Front.